Hello everybody and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we are going to be working on Linux servers and how to secure it. This will be done in a Debian kernel based server. So this guide is pretty much meant for anybody who's using Debian, Linux Mint if you want to make that a server, Ubuntu 18.04. If you're going to use CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora, Arch, this guide will still technically work for you. You would just have to make sure that your commands are the same as in there. For example, when we install software in Debian, we use apt for our installation, as most people who use CentOS and Red Hat will use Yum. So before you go ahead and follow this guide along, I would recommend making sure that anything that I do in here will work on your server that you're working on at the time being. Also, I do want to let everybody know that this is no way means of guaranteeing your server is 100% secure, obviously, but this is the basic fundamentals that you need to be able to actually lock your server down. A few things we're going to be going over with will be disabling root, making sure you have static IPs, how to create SSH, how to secure and encrypt your SSH using encryption keys, adding a few extra security features on there to stop DDoS attacks and brute forcing, installing fail2ban to again stop a DDoS and brute force, and then enabling your firewall to pretty much block everything outside of the port you're not using so that there's no random port just happen to be open. For example, if somebody came and installed something on your server that connects to the internet, you want to make sure that port is guaranteed to be blocked unless specified in your firewall, so nobody can go ahead and remote access into your system. As a bonus, I'm actually going to show you how to actually create a encryption key using Putty and PuttyGen on Windows. Even though we're using Linux servers more and more today, people are still using Windows client computers as well still. So in that case, a lot of them do not know how to create an encryption key to a Linux server. We can do it with a Windows server very easily, but maybe not a Linux server. So this video is going to actually show you how to install Putty and then how to actually make an encryption key for your Putty, and then put it right in there on the server and you're good to go. So first thing is first, I'm going to be doing this on a virtual machine like I do on all my videos. If you look up here, we have Debian 10, which is going to be our server, and I went ahead and installed Linux Mint as a client because you do need to have at least a client to test your SSH keys. I'm also doing this on a Windows laptop at the moment, so I also have Putty installed to show you what happens when you try to log in after you do the encryption keys and you lock all your settings down to show you that it does fail and everything else. And like always, everything we discuss in the actual video here will be down in the description below. Okay, so this guide that I actually went ahead and wrote, we'll go ahead and scroll through real quickly. It gives you everything you need. So we have your prerequisites, and I'm going to show you exactly all the information I'm using, and I left a spot over here for anybody who wants to follow along or anybody who wants to use this guide to be able to type in your actual own information here, so that when you're doing the guide you know what to split. Like for instance, every time you see the word admin, you know that that's the root name that you're going to create. Unless you chose admin, then you can. My root password will be password for the video. I do not recommend anybody to use this as your actual admin password. That is ridiculous. But I don't feel like making a really a detailed encrypted password for no reason. Then as we say down here, if you don't have Putty, I actually have links to the 64-bit and the 32-bit Putty, which will give you PuttyGen and all the other programs you need to be able to create your new encryption key on Windows. And then basically each step will show you exactly as we're going to go through. So for example, step 1, we're going to show you how to disable root. And as you can see here, the way I have the guide set up is this is what your terminal is going to look like. So mine would be root at Debian, and then this right here will be the commands that you're going to type in. So anything that you see in light blue is the command you're going to write. Now you can see here mine, I added admin. So in the case, if you decided to switch up a name and choose a different name, obviously everything here that says admin will be changed to something different. Then we go on to step 2, which is creating a static IP using command line, but I also threw in an extra for the desktop GUI because I am using the GUI, so it makes it a little bit easier. So I quickly wrote out a guide showing, obviously pictures on how to actually set up your command line your network interface through the desktop. The next thing we have is static your network through the command line in Debian. So I show you how to figure out your IP address, your Ethernet name, and pretty much walk you straight through on how to go ahead and set everything up. Here's a before and after picture, pinging to make sure everything is working. And then I threw in an extra Ubuntu 18.04 because if you are going to do this on Ubuntu, 18.04 started using NetPlan, which became more of a nightmare, I feel. So anybody who's actually doing this and they're actually doing this on their Ubuntu 18.04 server, you're not going to be able to do what I did up here. So I went ahead and actually showed you the commands on how to go ahead and set up your network configuration. Okay. And then after that, we get into our SSH encryption keys and how to make that. And then we get into extra security features to sit there and stop, DDoS attacks and no spoof. Installing fail to ban, installing your firewall or configuring your firewall if you already have it installed. And then how to do your encryption with Putty. So a lot of it is very straightforward. This guide is available for download in the description below. So enough talking. Let's go ahead and get this going because that's the reason why you're here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to static our IP address. Now you have two ways of doing this. You have a command line interface and you have the GUI desktop interface. As you can see here, I'm using the desktop interface, so I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. So if I want to go ahead and change my IP address, I scroll down here to the network connections icon and click Edit Connections. You can also get to it through System, Control Center, and then Advanced Network Configuration. Then from here, we're going to select our network adapter, which mine is called Wire Connection 1. And then we're going to go ahead and hit Edit the selected connection. Now in here, you have a bunch of different things you can choose from, but the only thing we're worried about here is the IPv4 settings. With IPv6, you can go ahead and disable if you want to. Whoops, hit the wrong one. So you can go ahead and hit ignore if you want to in that case, but doesn't matter. So for here, we're going to change our method to manual. And then we're going to go ahead and type in all our information here. So 192.168.3.10. As you can see here, that is the static gateways and everything that I've been received for this video. Your information will more than likely be different than what I have. My net mask is 24, or you can type in 255.255.255.0. The Linux system will understand both methods. And then your gateway would be whatever your gateway is. Now down here for your DNS servers, you're always going to want to put at least your router in. And you can leave it at just your router, but I've always liked to have two, because in case there's something wrong with my router or it's not working properly or some kind of configuration, at least I have an external one that's being able to show me that Google's still working and outside connections are still working. And then from there, we're going to hit save. We can close out of this video, or out of this box here. And then right here where it says enable networking, we're going to go ahead and turn that off and then turn it back on. And that's just a quick, easy way of actually setting a static IP. But if we go to Application, System Tools, and Terminal, again, I'm using the mate version of Debian. You could be using GNOME, KDE, and whatever the other one was, I forget. So all you have to do is pretty much get to wherever your terminal is and open it up. So it might be a little bit different from your desktop. But the network connection is the same if you run a desktop. So to go ahead and test to see that our network connection is good, we're going to type in IPA. And as you can see here, my internet is static to a 192.168.3.10 at subNAS 24, which is what I chose. Now, just to make sure everything is working, we're going to go ahead and ping our router. We're going to go ahead and ping an external DNS. And then we're going to go ahead and ping a URL. I usually like to ping Google. Perfect. Everything is up and working. If you did not receive the same message as I did where everything was successful, please go back and check your network configuration. Now, if you're using Ubuntu for this video, obviously there's a few extra differences. As you can see here, inside your configuration down here where it says installing Ubuntu, you're going to have to actually go through static and using the net plan. And then you're going to have to go ahead and edit your net plan to look very similar to what I have on the screen here. Okay, now to let you also know, NetPlan is very finicky. You cannot use tabs, you can't break the indentation. So what you see on my screen right now is exactly how you want to configure your Ubuntu interface on command line. With Debian, it's a little more lenient, especially with the older network configurations, how they have it set up. But with Ubuntu and their ridiculous NetPlan setup they're doing now, if you use tab instead of spaces, it will not work properly. It will give you an error. If you go ahead and use, if you put the indentation wrong, like for example, if this was further in or further out, you would get an error message and it would not work. So it's very, very finicky on how you want to set everything up. So make sure if you're setting yours up to do it pretty much exactly as I have done it here if you're using Ubuntu. And then the same thing, you're going to go ahead and hit sudo netplan and you're going to go ahead and apply it. And what it's going to do is going to fix it. Now, if you did everything correctly, you will not have anything shown, as you can see here. What it's going to go ahead and do is it's just going to be blank. So, but if you did do something wrong, it's going to go ahead and tell you you have an indentation problem. And that's 99% of all errors. You'll get an error saying can't apply netplan due to indentation, and then it'll tell you that, hey, your address is not indented right, or you hit tab instead of spaces. It is very painful. And then you're going to go ahead and restart your resolve config file as well. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and disable root. We cannot delete root, and we would not want to delete root, but there's no reason to keep root enabled. And also, it is a vulnerability issue for some people, because if somebody's able to guess your root password or get into root, they're able to go ahead and cause havoc on your server. So the best thing to do is to disable root access for logging in, and then later on we're going to show you how to remove root from either accessing it remotely as well. But for right now, we need to create a new user. The new user we're going to use is admin in this video. You can choose any admin you want or any username you want, but for video's sake, we're just going to use the word admin. So to do this, we're going to do add user, space, and then we're going to type in the name we want to use. I want to use admin. Press enter. Now you're going to be prompted for a password. Now this is going to be your new super user root admin. So make sure the password is very secure. Use exclamation points or special characters, capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers. Make sure it's 12 to 24 password for your situation. For this video, I'm just going to make it very easy for myself. As you saw, I just made it password, but I do not recommend you using password. Use something that's difficult to guess. The more stuff you put in there, the better it is. So we're going to type in our new password, type in another new password. All right, now what we're going to do here is going to ask you for the credentials of the admin user. For the most part, leave them all blank. Unless you want to fill them out, you're more than welcome to. Like for me, I can type in VMware Advisor. My room number is 427. My work phone number is 555-7356. We'll just say home phone number 555-1124. Other. And then there we go. So if you want to fill it out, you can, similar to this, but you don't have to. Most people usually leave it blank because, say for instance, you're working for a company, you went ahead, created this information. You don't want to leave your personal information there, especially if you happen to maybe move on to bigger, better things, or something ends up happening where you are no longer with the company. You don't want to leave your stuff there. So it's easier to leave everything blank, But if you do want to fill it out, this is pretty much the proper format you could fill out. Press Y if the information is correct. Now the next thing we got to do is give myself super user admin. Well, pretty much give myself sudo rights. So I got to be able to turn my admin, who is now just any old day user, as I type in su admin. Okay, and if I type in sudo who am I, type in the password I created, admin is not a sudoer, and I've been reported to the admins. So mainly in this case right here, it's letting me know that I actually do not have root access. It's just a waste. So go ahead and press exit to go back to your root at Debian. Now for here, we're going to have to go ahead and give myself, like I said, sudo access. So the easiest way of doing it is typing in usermod -a capital G sudo and admin. And a very simple breakdown of what this means is user mod means user modification. The -ag means add to group. And then sudo is obviously the group name. And then admin is the user you want to add to the group sudo. If everything's done correctly, you press enter. And that's it. If you have a problem with it or you've done anything wrong, you'll be greeted with an error saying either it's already been added to sudo, missed syntax, or something of that nature. So just make sure you pay attention as how we're filling it out. So now we got to go ahead and test if actually admin has sudo like we did before. So su-space admin. Okay, now you can see I'm a sudo admin right now. Now I'm going to type in sudo who am I again. Type in my password. And if you did it correctly, you'll be greeted with the word root. If you don't put the word sudo in front of it, you'll be greeted with admin, which is exactly what you are. But we want to make sure that if we type in the word sudo at any time, it automatically believes we're going to be root, and that's exactly what we want. To also further test it, you can always type in sudo apt update, and if it goes ahead and updates your repositories, then you know that everything's done correctly. Now, in this situation, if you're going to be doing this on a CentOS, that command will be wrong. It'll be sudo yum update, I believe. Again, so make sure you pay attention with certain things in the actual guide here. Okay, so now we have to go ahead and disable root, but we can't do that while we're logged in as root. So what we're going to do real quickly is we're just going to log out and then log out of root, and we're going to log back in as our new admin account. So as you can see here, we went ahead, logged in our new account. My desktop background is different, so we know this is not some kind of trick. As you can see, I'm logged in as admin. So first things first, open up terminal again. All right, so now again, I want to test to make sure that it wasn't a fluke. So sudo who am I? Type my password again, and I am root, so perfect. So now we have to disable the root account. So what we're going to have to type in is sudo usermod -p !root. Now again, a very simple way of breaking this down is, well, one, sudo means super user, okay, for lack of better words. Usermod is user modification. The -p stands for password, okay, and then the exclamation point, well, actually I did that wrong. I'm sorry. The exclamation point in this situation means to disable. Now, what it actually does is it scrambles the password and generates a random password that is pretty much impossible to just randomly guess. Even brute forcing would take a long time to figure it out, and that's the main point of this. And we're applying it to root. So technically, root will be no longer allowed, and what this actually does, it pretty much disables the account because it doesn't understand what the password is, and it just makes it unreadable. So you can't log in. So once we go ahead and we do this, we're going to press enter. And then again, if you've done it correctly, it will just go ahead and just bring you up for a new terminal. But I want to test to make sure that my root is not going to be able to log in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in su/root. Same thing we did before with our admin. We're going to go ahead and type in our old password. And as you can see, we have a failure. And that's exactly what we want to see. So again, if you just want to also see if maybe we made a mistake here, su root password, I'm going to put the exclamation point in there like we did just because maybe it changed to exclamation point. And again, it failed. So everything's looking good with that. Now, if you ever want to bring back the password for your root, all it actually is a very simple command. From your admin, you write sudo pswd, and you'll type in the word root. And then once you press enter, you'll be greeted with a new password. And then all you do now, root is able to be successfully, accessed now. Sudo, then we're going to go ahead and type in root. As you can see, root has now been re-enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and disable root again. So to recap what we have done so far, we have created a static IP for our new server, and we've gone ahead and deleted, or disabled technically, our root account and created a new admin account which will be our new root for the server. The next part of the video we're going to do is to install SSH, which is OpenSSH server, and then we're going to log into our client machine, and then we're going to create encrypted keys from our client to our server, and then after that we're going to locate the SSH config file, and we're going to alter the file a little bit so that the only way we can log into the server would be through our encryption keys only. So if we don't have an encryption key, we will be unable to log into the system. Okay, so let's start that process. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to install OpenSSH server, and then we're going to alter the configuration file, and then we're going to log into our Linux terminal on our client PC, not our server, our client. We're going to generate a new key, and then we're going to transfer it to the server so that the only way we can log into our server via SSH will be our new key. And then we're going to test everything in the end. So first thing is first, we have to make sure we have OpenSSH server installed. Now, if we go back to the guide that is down in the description below, first we can see here is we have to install OpenSSH server. Now, by default, most servers already have this installed. It may not be enabled on some of it. You may have to enable it, but for the most part, it's always been installed. But we don't have to worry about enabling it right now because we're going to actually alter the config file before we do anything as well. So first thing is first, let's just verify we have it installed. So sudo apt install open SSH server -y, and it says it's already been installed and it's the newest version, which is good. If yours is not, it will go ahead and go through the update process, which will only take a few moments to do the installation. Now, what we have to do is we want to change our port. Now, the default port's 22. Now, every person that has Google can figure this out. By default, we do not want to leave any ports as default because we don't want to leave it vulnerable, especially if we're going to be allowing this access to the outside world. I don't want to leave it at port 22 because that's just giving people a very easy way of getting into something. So if I'm trying to compromise your system here, the first thing I'm going to try to do is I'm trying to attack root and your SSH port, because there's a very good chance you're not sitting at your servers all day long. You're using some kind of SSH software to connect back and forth to your Linux terminals and your Linux servers. So I want to change that to something else. Now the port that I chose is 2200. You can choose any port you want as long as it's not a default port. Example, 22, 23, 53, 80, 445, 486, 487, and so on and so forth. It all depends on what it is, but try to pick something that has 4 numbers. So, example 4598. Look at that. That's a random number. That's a good thing. And it's going to make it more difficult for me to figure it out. Which is, again, much easier for you to have to not worry about somebody always trying to hack the system. Again, this is no guarantee that somebody can't figure out your port. It just takes them longer to figure it out. And that's what our main goal is, to put so many different blocks in front of somebody that they just get tired of trying and then moving on from there. So very simply, it's going to be sudo. Now the text editor I like to use is nano. You may choose any text editor you want, like Vim or VI or whatever, but I always like nano, always used it, so to me, I'm going to stick with nano. And then we're going to go to etc ssh and then sshd config. Press enter, and then you'll be greeted with this page. Now we're going to come back to this a little bit later towards the end of this portion of the tutorial. But right now, I want to just get my port changed automatically. I want to make sure that changing the port is going to actually work right out of the box. So even if I don't do anything else besides changing the port, at least I know that, at least I'm somewhat more protected than just having it blatantly open to 22. So you're going to scroll down to where it says port, and you're just going to remove the hashtag by deleting it, and then just changing the port to whatever you want. So like I said, if you want to make it 4583, you can. There's no problem with that. But to keep the video simple, we're going to just add 2 zeros at the end of it. Then you're going to press Control X to save, Y, and then enter. Now we're going to have to go ahead and restart the SSH config because it's honestly not going to figure this out yet because it's already been started. So whatever we do in that config file will not take place until we restart the system or restart SSH. So it's a very simple command. It'll be sudo, if I can spell, system control, restart SSH. Now, very simple command, sudo, system control, which handles all the services. We're telling it to restart the SSH service. Press enter, and as long as you're greeted with nothing besides, as you can see on the screen here, another blinking cursor, everything worked out well. If you ended up getting some error message, you need to go back to your SSH config file and then correct whatever error that you're actually having. Now, if you want to see if it actually is actively running, you will go to sudo system control status SSH. Now, because we restarted SSH, you should now see where it says active on my screen. It should say active on your screen. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and log into our Linux terminal on our client PC and then see if we can SSH into our new server here. Okay, so I'm now logged into my client PC, and then I'm going to open up our terminal. So as you can see here, I'm using Linux Mint. Again, there is no, as you can see, I have a different username, different setup, so there's no trickery going on here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to test to make sure port 22 is actually not accepting communication. So SSH, you're going to type in the username and the IP address of the server that you're trying to connect to. And that's it. So if you don't change to port 22, this is how you're going to SSH into the server, or into any computer technically if you don't change port 22. So we're going to press enter. And as you can see, we have connection refused because it's not accepting an answer on port 22, which is exactly what we want. I wanted to sit there and give me that, so at least I know that my config file has been applied to my SSH server. So to go ahead and actually connect to it, we're going to type in the same thing, but we have to add which port to connect to. So you're going to hit space -P, which means port, and then type in the port that you want to go to. So space 2200 for me. Press enter. You're going to be prompted with a encryption key fingerprint. You have to press yes or no, or type yes or no. So I'm going to go ahead and type in yes. If you just type in Y, you just get an answer saying you have to type in yes or no. Then you'll be greeted with the password, so I'm going to type in the password. And there we go. We are all good to go. So now I'm able to log into it. If I type in top, I see that all the system that's running on there, and we're good to go. As you can see here up top, it does now say admin at Debian, which is the server I'm working on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create the encryption key. And the encryption key for the server is very simple. So what we're going to do first is type in exit, because we want to log back in. Oops. We want to be logged back in out of the server and back on our own. So as you can see here, I'm now locally connected. But if you want to be sure you're not connected to the server, very simply close out of the terminal and just open up a new one. It is perfectly fine. So first thing is first. Now, considering we've already tested SSH, we should now have an SSH folder already built into the system. To verify that, very simply just type in cd.ssh. Now, if you go into a folder that actually has that .ssh, you should be good to go. And what that means here is that we went ahead and already SSH into another computer, and it's created not folder, but a file called known hosts, which means that it's already connected to the host back and forth. Okay? But we want to now create an encryption key for our server. Now I went ahead and made myself some notes over here just to make it easier for myself. So we're going to go ahead and move things around just a little bit for us. Okay, so the first thing is we have to now create the encryption key using RSA. Now there are a few different encryption keys we're going to use that we can use, but in this video we're going to use RSA because that's the simplest at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and copy and paste that right into our terminal, exactly as is. We do not need to run as sudo, because if we run as a sudo, it's going to break the encryption key and we're not going to be able to log in anyway. So we go ahead, type in ssh-keygen-t-rsa. Pretty much what the command is, we're going to create a SSH key. We're going to generate an SSH key. The T stands for which type, and the type we're going to use is RSA. Press enter. Now the next parts are going to be fairly simple. Where do we want to save the file? We want to save it in the .ssh folder, which is perfect. So we're going to enter at this point here because we want to save it in the default, which as you can see here is our default location. Now this is an option for most people. I like to put this on only because I feel it adds an extra level of security. Enter passphrase. Now when you create the encryption key and you put it over there, and you don't put a passphrase on there, it automatically logs you in as long as the credential is correct. The keys are matching. So when you go to log in, it's not going to ask you for a password anymore. You know, it's just going to say, oh, he's got the public key, he's got the private key, we're good to go, log him in. I like to add this because what it does is that it says, hey, what's the password for the encryption key? And then if they don't know the password, they still get blocked from the server. So this is up to you and how you want to do this, depending on what kind of level of security you want. Me personally, I like to put a passphrase on here. So a passphrase could be any of your passwords you want. If you kind of want to make it the same as your admin password, you can. That's on your server. I don't recommend it, but you can do it that way as well. You'll be prompted to enter the same one again, and then you'll be generated your fingerprint key. Now, you don't have to use a passphrase. If you don't want to use a passphrase, just hit enter at both of them and it's just going to skip past it. But me personally, I like to always put a password on there. So as you can see here, it went ahead and generated our key. There's our random keyart image, and then we're all good to go. Now, you can go ahead and steal this information. It doesn't bother me because it's not going to work. But this is something you would not want to show people to the real world if you're using a live environment. So very simply, if I type in ls right now, because we are still in the .ssh folder, you can see now I have 3 files in there. The ID_RSA, which is the private key, and the ID_RSA, which is the public key. The public key is the key that we're going to give out to the server. So the next part of it is I'll go ahead and actually write this out. SSH copy -ID, which means we're going to copy an ID through SSH. The actual ID that we're going to copy, which is -I, will be in .ssh idrsa.pub, which we said we want to copy the public key over. And then it's going to ask where and which server. So I want to do it to my admin server at 192.168.3.10 on port 2200. Make sure you do this correctly, because if you make any mistakes or you put it to the wrong folder, you do anything like that, you're going to pretty much botch up your whole server. And then you're going to have to go back to your server, remove SSH, and then go ahead and reinstall it, or pretty much remove the keys off of SSH to go ahead and fix your problem you're having. So make sure that when you're doing this, you're copying over the public file and that you're doing it to your correct information. So mine, again, is admin at 192.168.3.10, and the port that I chose is 2200. So make sure everything is correct. Press enter. You'll be prompted with the password for your server. So it's asking me for my admin password on the server, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in. And now it says that everything went ahead and we're looking good. So now we have two ways of logging in. The other way, which we already did, which I'll show you. The original way, which is SSH admin. Oops. Trying to go ahead and copy that. So I can just go ahead and show you over here as well. Okay, so you have two ways of doing it still. You have our traditional way that we did the first time, but now with the encryption key, it gives you a very special way of actually logging in. So SSH-P, and then the port, which is 2200, and this code. So we're going to go ahead and try to use this. Exactly as you see here. So make sure you have your quotes in there, and so on. Press enter. And it's not functioning for some reason. So let's, okay, forgot to put a space in there. Okay, so now see, as you can see here, my private key is locked. So if I'm unable to enter this key, so let's say I'll just type in the wrong one, I get an error saying I can't log in. And as you can see here, failed to log in. So let's go ahead and close it out. So let me go ahead and try it again. Type in the password that is correct. Now I can do this as well, automatically unlock the key whenever I'm logged in. That's a preference for anybody else. Me personally, I usually have that turned off. Again, more security. So if somebody's actually at my computer, okay, they can't just automatically do this and be like, oh, he's stupid enough to leave the password, logged in every time. Good for him. And there you go. So as you can see here, I went ahead, it logged me in. It didn't even ask me for the admin password because the keys was correct. Now, you still can log in. So let me go ahead and exit out of this. You can still log in, though, using clear text password. So if we do, where is it? The original way, well, unfortunately on here, it's not going to show me that. So let me just go ahead and bring up Putty real quickly. And I'm going to show you on Putty that even though I don't have a key on my Windows computer, I'm still going to be able to, SSH into the server. Okay, so I have Putty open here on my Windows client. So I'm going to type in 192.168.3.10, which is the server, at 2200. There's nothing else added to it. There's no special keys. I didn't put any encryptions on it. As you can see, authorization's all set to blank. Hit open. Log in. I want to log in as the admin and the password. And as you can see, I'm still logging in. And this is something we don't want to do because there's no reason then to have the encryption key if we're still going to be able to allow people to log in, using the regular clear text passwords. So I'll go ahead and close that. So as of right now, we are all done with our Linux terminal. on Linux Mint. And now we're going to go back to the server, and then we're going to edit the config file just a little bit more, and then we're going to come back to the file here, to the client here, and then we're going to go and test out the encryption keys on both the Linux terminal you see here and the Windows PuTTY to see if we went ahead and locked our SSH configuration. Okay, so now we're back on the server. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into our SSH config file, and we're going to edit a few things inside here now. All right, so let's go over to my little guide here. All right, so when we get to here, we're going to now want to change a few things. We're going to want to permit root login to no, password authentication to no, use PAM as no. Okay, and then we're going to want to add a user list and a deny list as well to it. So say you have multiple users on your server, you would only want, say, the admins to be able to SSH into it. Nobody else can, or nobody else can use other users. So when you put an allow list in there, it only allows whatever is on that list to connect. So even if I want to try to log in as root or say another user, if it doesn't actually match the allow list, they're not going to let them in no matter what, even if they have the encryption keys right and so on and so forth. Same thing with the denied user list. When you deny a user, even if he has all the correct encryption keys and everything else, if he's on this list down here, he'll be kicked out. So I'll give you a quick example. You have admin, you have Joe, and you have Jeffrey. All three of them were on the allow list, but now Joe quit. So we're going to put Joe on the deny list because we're not sure if Joe has his keys on other computers or whatever he may have done. Now, can we check for it? Yes, but we really just kind of want to get him banned right away while we go through the system. So when I go ahead and add Joe to the denied user list, he will be automatically prompted with all the same stuff. So he'll add the encryption, the password will come up. But once it goes ahead and checks this file here and realizes that Joe's in the denied list, it's going to automatically give him an authentication error, meaning that he's on the denied list and not allowed to connect. In that case right there, he'll know that he's no longer allowed to do what he has to do, and he cannot cause any harm to the system if he deems necessary. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go ahead and maximize this screen, and then we're just going to do a little bit of scrolling. So we're going to scroll down, okay, to authentication here. Now authentication, you can see, has permit root login. So we're going to delete the hashtag so that now it's active. And we're going to change it to no at the end. So delete everything at the end and then change it to no. Now next thing we're going to look for is password authentication, yes. Now as you can see here, this pretty much disables clear text passwords, and we don't want clear text passwords to be allowed to be used on our server. So we're going to go ahead and uncheck that and change that to no. We also want challenge response authentication to set to no, but with the newer version of SSH, it actually has it already set to no. So we don't have to worry about that. Now at the bottom here, you have use PAM, and again, we're going to change that to no. So right now, we've pretty much removed any way possible that if you don't have an encryption key on here, and we turned off password authentication and challenge response turned off on both of them, and then we don't allow root to log in, when we set PAM to no, pretty much just says, hey, if you don't got an encryption key, we can't let you in at this point. Now, a few other things you can do here is the X11 forwarding. If you don't use it, I usually turn it off. So I set that to no, but this is an optional. You don't have to. It doesn't affect it because a lot of people don't use X11. And what X11 does means if I'm able to log into your server, I'm able to actually open up screen capture technically through SSH. It's pretty cool. You can use it in some ways, but I usually turn it off because I don't bother. If you're going to use SSH, you're going to use a terminal. We're not going to open up Dolphin and all that stuff and program files. So the last thing we got to do is create our allow and delete user or deny user folders. So all the way at the bottom here, as you can see, I can't go any further down. We're going to type in exactly as we can see. So hashtag allow users. And underneath that, we're going to type in allow users just as you see there, and we're going to type in the username exactly as you created. So I created mine all lowercase, so I'm going to make sure it's all lowercase. If you make it capital, it's not going to work. And then the same thing with deny users. Another hashtag in front of it, type in deny users as you see here, and then type in the word root. So now what we're going to do is once we did all that, we're going to hit Control X, press Y, enter to save it, and then we're going to go ahead and restart SSH again. And if we want, we can verify the status. As you can see, it is running. So now what that went ahead and did was it disabled pretty much any other way we can get onto the server without an encryption key. Now, if you want to add an encryption key to the server, you will have to go back in there and re-edit them. So say, for instance, if you are going to want to add an encryption key, you can, well, one, manually copy and paste it directly over to the server. But in Windows, you can't do that. Well, you can, but you can't just easily go that. You have to copy and paste it. If you're on a Linux server, you can still SSH the key over to it as long as all the credentials work. It will accept that information still. So if I did do the SSH copy ID to that server, as long as everything's valid, it will accept that that method of installation. Because unfortunately, other than that, the only way to install an actual key is to come here and physically do it. So as I'll show you real quickly, all your keys are located in this folder under authorized keys. So if I go ahead and open it up, there's my key, as you can see, for my Linux Mint. So if I want to add another key, I would just have to pretty much copy and paste it into here and then save it. And then from that point, we're good to go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop over to my Linux Mint terminal, and I'm going to go ahead and try to SSH back into it again to make sure, one, I can still connect. And then after that, we're going to log into our PutyGen through our Windows terminal, and then we're going to see if we can connect through that as well. We should be denied through Windows, and we should be allowed through Linux. So let's hop on over and see if that's the case. Okay, so now I'm back over here on my terminal for Linux Mint, and then we're going to do what we did before. So SSH-P 2200 admin at 192.168.3.10. Press enter, and then look at that. Logged in directly with no questions asked, no reason for any kind of passwords because we've already verified all our passwords and our encryption keys. So I like this. This is very good. We're looking good. So now we're going to hop in on our Windows SSH client, and then we're going to see if we get the same exact message as we got here. Okay, so as you can see here, I have Putty up and open, and let's go ahead and try to see if we can get into it. Now again, just to show everybody here, I don't have any authorization keys put in, nothing installed. So this is just as vanilla as we're going to get. Okay, we're going to go ahead and click open, log in as admin, and there we go. No supported authentication methods available. Server sent public key. So what that means is that it doesn't have a public key or a private key associated with this server to this terminal in Windows, so it's not going to let me on the server. So with all that, I think we actually went successful here. So to recap, what we did in this section is we went ahead and installed OpenSSH Server. We went ahead and created an encryption key on our client for Linux to our server. We verified and tested that it worked. Then we went ahead and configured our SSH config file to block any kind of clear text passwords, anybody who's not authorized, and pretty much anybody who doesn't have a key on the server. And then we went ahead and tested it again to make sure that it worked on our Linux server or our Linux client, and our Windows was denied access completely. So our next portion of the video will be installing the extra security features on our server, as well as installing fail to ban and UFW, which is a Linux firewall. So let's go ahead, hop on over on our server, and let's finish this video up. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to enable a few extra security features on our server, as well as install two pieces of software, fail to ban and our UFW firewall. Now, to quickly go over what fail to ban and UFW is fail to ban is a IP monitor that monitors all your logs and tests to see who's trying to pretty much brute force into your system. So if I tried logging in like 3, 4, 5, 6 times wrong password, it's going to go ahead and ban the IP address. It only bans it probably for maybe a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes max. And what that does is, say for instance, if I actually am legitimately trying to log in, I forgot my password, it will go ahead and re-enable my IP address so I'm able to log in. But if you're trying to brute force and you start getting all these ban errors, you're going to more than likely probably stop trying to log into the system. So that's what fail to ban really does. You can also do a few editing in the config files and everything, but I will not go over that in this video to try to keep it as short as possible. And UFW is basically the Linux firewall. What that will go ahead and do is it just pretty much enables your firewall, and we're going to allow select ports. For instance, our SSH port, our HTTP port, and our HTTPS port, as well as a few other ones if we want to later on down the road. It will also go ahead and lock our global connection for incoming so that only select ports that we allow to come into our port will be allowed, and it will go ahead and enable all outgoing because we do want it to communicate outside the world. So pretty much we'll go here and look at my guide that I created. The first thing we're going to do again is enable the extra security features. Now it's a very straightforward way of doing it. We just have to go into the systemcontrol.config file and just hashtag a few configurations in there. So for us to go ahead and do this, we're going to type in sudo nano etc and sysctl.conf. Type in our password, and then we're going to be greeted with our config file. Now in here, this pretty much controls how the system wants to work, especially when it comes to networking. We're going to go ahead first off enable spoof protection. So you scroll down here, we have these two here that are checked off or hashtagged off. We're going to remove the tags for them. And what this does is that it just enables spoof protection against our server. All right, then after that, we're going to want to go ahead and go further down. Keep going. And then we want to go ahead and untack the MITM, which stands for man in the middle attacks. We want to go ahead and pretty much pull them off so that we cannot have to worry about too many pings, pretty much for your ICMP, and redirect it back to them. Now, the last three things we want to go ahead and enable is we want to enable the blocking for ICMP redirects, which is ping. As it says here, we're not a router, and this server is not a router. So this pretty much blocks all ping attacks directly to the server to prevent brute forcing and DDoS attacks as well. And the same thing here with the IP source route packets. We're going to go ahead and untag them because, again, as it says, we are not a router, and the server is not a router. So there's no reason to go ahead and keep them disabled. And the final thing we're going to want to do here is to log all Martian packets. So Martian packets are pretty much as they are. They're packets that we're not really sure where they're coming from. They haven't been, blacklisted or whitelisted at the moment. So we want to be able to take a log of it. So in case there's an IP that does get through for whatever reason, we're able to figure it out, and if we want to later on ban and block it. So that's actually all we have to do with the system control config file here. Once we go ahead and pretty much remove the hashtags of all of them, we can go ahead and save our file. And as you can see, very simple, very easy to go. And if you go into here on our actual setup here, I went ahead and broke it down for anybody that wants to go look at it. So in the file, when you see this section here, this is what you have to untag, and then the same thing all the way down. The next thing we're going to want to install is fail to ban. Now, as I said before, fail to ban is pretty much a software that monitors your logs and verifies if anybody's trying to brute force into it with too many failed authentications to the server. This is very good for most people because if you do know your password, there's a very good chance you are logging in. And if you have an encryption key, you should be allowed to log in. If you don't, more than likely this person is trying to do some kind of malicious intent to your server to cause harm, and we don't want that. So very easily, it's sudo apt install fail to ban -y to allow yes, and then we'll go ahead and wait for it to finish installing, which only takes roughly around a few seconds. I'll go back to our file here. Now, once it's installed, it should automatically enable itself, but I also went ahead and wrote the two scripts here to enable and to start fail to ban in case it doesn't. So sudo system control, which I believe I'm doing it correctly, I could be wrong, that's correct. Enable fail to ban. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, but instead of doing enable, we're going to type in the word start. If everything's done correctly, you'll see the exact same on my screen here, where it'll go ahead and enable the service, as you can see above. And then when you do start, you'll never be prompted with anything, but it'll go ahead and let you know. Now, again, if you want to know the status, if it is actually running, just go ahead and type in status, fail to ban. As you can see here, the service is actually running, as it says here, and everything is good to go. And that's pretty much it for fail to ban. There's really no command that you go into it. There's nothing you can really change or add to it. Like I said, it just monitors your IP logs and see if there's anything that's acting a little malicious or not normal outside the spectrum of the server here. So the next thing we're going to do real quickly is install UFW and then configure the firewall to allow select rules, as you can see here. We're going to deny most incoming and allow all outgoing. And then we're going to go ahead and enable the UFW. So first things first, sudo apt install UFW-y. Okay, so now we went ahead, enabled it. So we can go ahead and actually start the process now. But the thing is, I like to configure the firewall rules before we start it, so we don't have to keep restarting the service every time we do it. So the easiest way of doing it, as you can see here, is just adding your actual, your ports available right now. Now, as you can see, I have two different styles of port configuration. One is limit and one's allow. What limit does, it actually limits the amount of connections allowed per port. So we're telling it that on SSH to limit the amount of connections from user to server. I do believe that they actually specify in the config file what the limit is, but I believe the maximum limit is 3. But you can change that at any given time. You can make it 1, 2, 15, whatever you want. But the more people you allow to it, the more chances are you're going to compromise your system. So to go ahead and do that, it's sudo UFW limit, and then we're going to type in the port that we want. So my port for SSH is 2200, and my protocol is TCP. Go ahead and press enter. And then if you're going ahead and everything's good, you'll be given a rules updated and rules updated v6. So we're going to do the same thing for our HTTP and HTTPS, which is sudo UFW allow, because I want to allow all traffic, for 80. And then they're going to be the same thing for 443. Now you can go ahead and add a few other things. So on this server here, I actually have another program called Webmin, and that's actually installed as well. And that uses port 10,000. So for me, I want to go ahead and sudo UFW allow 10,000 on TCP. Now I can go ahead and change that as well to a limit, and again, it'll only limit the amount of connections for that port as well. So it's up to you how you want to do it. If you want to know what Webmin is, you can check out my other videos. on my channel to go ahead in more detail of how to install Webmin and what it actually is. But to give you a quick summary, Webmin is a graphical user interface through the web browser. So if you're using a command line only server and you're not really good at command lines, this allows you to actually configure your server through a GUI via web browser. And you can do it from anywhere in the world. So if you're in the USA and then you happen to go to Europe or you need to configure it, you can still do the same configurations, overseas or anywhere in the world. So next thing we have to do is configure our global connections. Now, very simply, hit the wrong button. So very simply, sudo ufw default deny incoming and allow incoming. So it pretty much says that all our global connections, our default would just be to deny all incoming as per this. And the same thing with outgoing. Our default for all outgoing will be allow. So sudo ufw default, and then we're going to hit deny incoming, as I spelt that wrong, which more than likely I spelt it wrong, but I'll go ahead and I did, so we got to go ahead and go back and default deny, and then you'll go ahead and be given the prompt you see on the screen here. Now sudo ufw default allow outgoing. Again, if I knew how to spell, we will be good. Okay, so as long as you spell everything correctly, you'll be prompted with the default outgoing policies changed to allow and the default incoming policies changed to deny. So now that we have our rules and ports and everything configured, now it's time to go ahead and enable our UFW. So now we go back over here. It's very simple to enable UFW, very simply by just typing in sudo UFW enable. So sudo UFW enable. Wait a few seconds. And now it tells you that the firewall is active and enabled on system startup. If your firewall gives you some form of error at this, please check the log file to figure out exactly what's going on in the UFW folder. But more than likely, if you follow the tutorial that I just did and everything's been successful, you'll be greeted with this successful response. Now, the same thing, if I wanted to see the status, I'll just type in sudo ufw status. And then what you see here is all the ports I allowed available open. So as you can see here, I have my SSH, my HTTP, HTTPS, and my Webmin ports are all either allowed or limited. And then the same thing on v6. Now my IPv6 is actually disabled, so those actual rules don't apply at all. But it's still good to have on there in case you accidentally enable it and you're not realizing what you did wrong or what's going on. Now you can go ahead and check the actual status of UFW in system control. So system CTL status UFW, and as you can see here, it's saying that it's right now not active, it's not running, and that it is loaded though. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually start it. So sudo system control start UFW, press enter. And then we check the status. As you can see now, everything is actually good to go and running. Well, and that's pretty much it to adding the extra features and the firewall and so on. Now, you can go ahead and change anything you want in this. Like, again, if you want to add more ports to your firewall, you would just follow the same system I had going on here when I did the limit and allow and the port numbers. If it's a UDP, you type in UDP. If it's a different protocol, you type in the protocol you need. But that's about it, and that's all you really need. So what we're going to do real quickly is I'm actually going to log into my Linux terminal on my Linux Mint, and I'm going to make sure my SSH still works properly. Now, we already know that it's not going to work on Windows because we've already been denied that before we even applied the protocols. So let's hop over to our Linux Mint and try to see if we can still SSH into our server. Okay, so now we're over here on our client for Linux, and I'm using, like I said, Linux Mint. I'm going to open up terminal. And then as I did before, I'm just going to go ahead and type in SSH-P. All right. Then we're going to do quotation 2200, and then another quotation at the server I want to go at, admin at 192.168.3.10. Press enter. And as you can see here, we're still able to log in. So even though the firewall is turned on and active, it knows that our SSH port at 2200 is open and that our encryption key is still functioning the way it should be. And let's head back over to our server real quickly. So let's go ahead and figure out and kind of wrap up what we've gone through in this entire tutorial. We went ahead and created a static IP. Then we went ahead and disabled root and created a new root user. We went ahead and created an SSH server on the server. We created a encryption key from a client to our server and verified it works. Then we went ahead and locked down our SSH config file to allow only our encryption from our client to our server. So if you don't have an encryption key, you cannot log into the system, or if your encryption key is broken, you will have to go ahead and redo the encryption key. We also went ahead and tested on the Windows client to verify that it doesn't connect, and that was true. It was successfully unconnecting to our server with an error saying the key was invalid. Then we went ahead and enabled our extra security features, which is pretty much stopping pings, DDoS attack, brute forcing, and so on. Then we installed fail to ban, which again is a IP monitoring software that will ban your IP address if you have too many failed attempts to the server. And then finally, we went ahead and enabled our firewall on our Linux server. And then we tested it with our client to make sure that we can still log in with our client. And then we locked down all the ports that we need to and changed our global incoming and outgoing to either deny or allow depending on our access we needed. Okay, so as a bonus, I did say I will also teach you how to connect your PuTTY from Windows over to your Linux server. So first you have to do is make sure you download PuTTY. So open up a web browser here. As you can see, it's still a part of our secure Linux server. And pretty much just go ahead and look for PuTTY download. Download PuTTY. Click here. And then you're going to want to either pick your 32-bit or your 64-bit installer. This will give you everything you need with all the utilities. So as you can see down here, we'll get our PuTTY, our FTP PuTTY, PuttyGen, and everything. So and your pageant. But instead of downloading everything, one at a time, it's just better just to download the installer so you can get them all. All right. So first things first is I want to open up PuttyGen. Okay, and what PuttyGen is just a key generator for it. So what we're going to do here is we're simply going to hit generate. And now when it says generate here, it says please generate some randomness by moving the mouse over the blank area. And the blank area is here. So just pretty much just go ballistic. Okay. So as you can see here, we went ahead and created a public key. As you can see, it's right here. I would not recommend showing this to anybody, but for this video I can, because once this video is over with, this key gets destroyed. So there's a few things you may want to do. First off, the key comment. I always like to name what the key is. So for instance, Debian SVR for Debian server. So I know that this key is meant for my Debian server that I'm working on. If you have a actual domain or something like that, you can call it DC01, Debian. So it's the domain controller for your Debian servers. But for this video, we're just going to keep it simple. I'm going to call it my Debian server because that's what I'm actually uploading the key to. Now, passphrase is a choice. I like to put it on there for the extra security features. What it does is that when you go to try to use the key and it tries to authenticate with the server, it's going to ask you for a password to unlock the private key. If you don't actually have that, it won't let you log into the server. If you lose that password, you have to go ahead and redo all this all over again. So I don't recommend losing it. This is optional, but I always like to add extra security if possible. So the next thing we're going to do in this is we're going to save both the public key and the private key. Now, I like to save them in a folder called My Documents. under Putty, because at least I know where the keys are. So we're going to go ahead and hit Save Public Key. And as you can see here, I already had keys made earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and overwrite them. So I'm going to call mine the Putty Public because that's what it is. Hit Save. I'm going to overwrite mine. And we do the same thing for the private key. Now you can see it's under this PC, Documents, and Putty. Now if you want, you can create a folder for each key if you want, but that's up to you. So if you have like multiple servers you're doing this for, if you want to name each server, you can. Me personally, I pretty much use the same private key and just generate multiple publics in that case. But that's not really for this video. So we're going to go ahead and hit Putty Private, hit Save. I'm going to overwrite it. So for the most part, we're pretty much done, but what we're going to do here is we want to copy all this. Now, the reason why we saved the public keys, because if I want to actually, see, I can load private keys, I can save them and everything else. If I'm having something like that, I want to, add it to it later, I can, so I always have the key. But for this video, we're going to copy this actually to the server right now. So I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to open up a SSH into my Linux server that I have. And on the server I'm using, obviously, is Debian. All right, I'm going to hit open. I'm going to log directly into it right now, so we're all good. Now, you can go ahead and WinSCP into it as well and do some copy and pasting and just copy the file back over, but I feel that this works just as good. So first things first, we have to go into our SSH folder. So cd.ssh. Then we're going to press L and S to see that we have a file in there called authorized keys. And that's where all your keys get stored for any client you connect to. So what I'm going to do here is sudo nano to edit the file and type in authorized _ keys. Press enter. Type in my admin password, and there you go. So now I have one key already in here for a Linux, for my Linux client that I created, but now I'm going to copy over my Windows one here. So what I'm going to do here very simply is hit select all, hit copy, and then here, just go ahead and paste. Now it may paste the way mine looks like this, but if you hit your home button, it brings you all the way back to the beginning, which is what we want. So as you can see here, we have both of them in there, nothing got overwritten, and we're good. So now I'm going to hit Control X and then press Y to save it, and then hit enter again to save the file. Now I want to go ahead and restart SSH, so I'm going to do sudo system control restart SSH. So now I've applied the keys and make sure the keys are good. So exit out of this. And then we're going to go ahead and exit out of PuttyGen. Okay, so to apply the actual key and everything to Putty is very simple. We're going to go down and actually open up Putty. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to first off type in my host name or IP and configure the port. Now the next thing we're going to have to do is go down to where it says connection. And then in here you're going to see a bunch of different things. So we're going to go down to SSH, hit the plus C, on the plus sign, sorry. And then we're going to go down to auth. Now in here, we're going to go ahead and look for the private key file authentication. So I'm going to hit browse. I'm going to open up the private key that we saved earlier. Hit open. And now once all that's ready to go, if you want, you can go into something, under data. And if you want, you can type in admin if that's the normal auto login name. But I usually don't bother with that because sometimes I use obviously different usernames to log in every time. But this is pretty much just for this server as we're doing it. So once we go back, we verify that the private key is good. We're going to hit open. It's going to ask you for which name you want to log in as. So I'm going to hit admin. Now see, I have the passphrase for the private key, and that's what it's asking for here, not the password for your admin. your admin password on the server, but asking you for the passphrase to, activate the private key. And there we go. So once I type it in, I am ready to go. Now, I'll go ahead and exit. And let me do that one more time. And it should give me an error if I don't type in the password. So I'll go back down, go to auth, open up the private key, hit open, type in admin. Now, if I type in the wrong password, see, eventually, it just will not let me in. So I keep hitting enter, I can't do it. So until I actually type in the correct password, it won't let me into the system at all. It doesn't error me out. You can go in the settings and actually change it to, like, say if you do it 3 times or 4 times, it will just say no good. But for this video, I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible for you. But that is exactly how you can go ahead and apply a encryption key from your Windows computer to your Debian computer. Now I'll go ahead and open up my actual Debian server here. And then just to prove that we do have our 2 keys in here, sudo nano.ssh authorized keys, and I spelled it wrong, which is okay. And there you go. So we have our 2 keys from earlier. If I look all at the end, as you can see, this is Debian server, which matches what we had originally. So at least I know we're all good to go. And that's pretty much it. It's a very simple process to be able to actually link them together. You can do multiple keys. You can do a lot of different things as well, adding it to it. As well as inside Putty too, they actually have another feature in here where if you go down to auth and you see where it says attempt authentication through pagan, you can turn it on and off. Now what pagan actually is I'll go ahead and open up my Putty folder. So inside Putty, if you actually run the private key, see, load into pagan, type in the password to unlock the key. If you look down here in my icons, I actually now have the key loaded. So if I want, I can keep adding more and more private keys to this. And what it'll do is it'll actually run a list through all these actual keys to see which one will work on the server. So if you have, like, say 5 or 6 servers, multiple privates, multiple public keys, having it inside the PuttyGen key list will actually be very helpful in the end, so you don't actually confuse which keys are what. It'll automatically just say, okay, which key is this? It's a Debian server. It'll run it against this key as well. And that's pretty much it on how to set up your Putty with Linux servers. Well, that will be the end of this tutorial on how to configure a secure Linux server, or technically securing your Linux server. I hope you liked the video. Subscribe. I do post a lot more videos out there, pretty much showing pretty much the same thing you see here. I also do work with pfSense, how to do configure in networking with pfSense, how to configure your virtual NIC editor on VMware Workstation, and I do some obscurities like the first ever Ubuntu ever installed, the first ever Min, Windows beta testings from back in the day, like Neptune and pre-Luna. And then we also do our Windows installations, server installations. So I try to keep a little bit of everything. And all of it is actually done in VMware Workstation, so you can copy what I'm doing. And it also shows you a few tips and tricks, like how to make a dual boot in Linux Workstation, and how to maybe make a virtual and then copy it to a real server, or just copy it off your virtual onto, say, like a flash drive and install it somewhere else. So yeah, I always recommend people to just check out my videos. If you like them, subscribe. But always put comments. And then, like always, everything we do in the videos is all in the description below. So the actual guide that we worked on in the videos here, how to secure a server, is actually down below in on my cloud server. And then you can be able to download this, and if you want, you can just pretty much skip through, copy and paste whatever you want. And yeah, so Until next time, guys, I hope everybody has a great day, and I will see you on the next video.